All right, so this essentially is Photoshop. Right now, I already have an image open, but essentially like Illustrator, when you open it up, it'll bring you to this kind of like blank canvas with your different tools on your sides, as well as the regular ones up top, similar to Illustrator. So to get started on a new project, like Illustrator, you go to File and then New, and then it will bring you to these options. So very similar, you can type in the title. So for example, I'm just going to do Photoshop tutorial as my name, and then you can also choose the paper size as well, so the artboard. So we're going to do 11 by 17. So you can manually type those in, and then same like Illustrator, you can change it to inches, centimeters, millimeters, whatever you like to work in, but typically inches is a good way to start. And then you can work on artboards or like paper sizes, and then resolution. Right now I have it set to 200, so just keep in mind, depending on the size of your image, that number will either increase if you want it more higher res, or if you want just a very like small size file, you could always have it a lower number. And essentially it's pixels per inch or pixels per centimeter. So again, keeping in mind what units you're working in, because this is more like a graphic representation tool where it's a collage, it's more artistic. The actual measurements aren't as critical as Illustrator or AutoCAD, for example. So, but it's always good to keep in mind in terms of scaling things and making sure everything kind of lines up when you're exporting as well. So again, you can choose a different type of coloring you want for your image. RGB, again, is for any kind of images that you're going to be posting online or any kind of graphic work that's on a digital computer screen. RGB will print it or will show exactly how you input it into your software. Whereas with CMYK, when you're printing anything that you put in those with that color will print exactly using that same color coding system for CMYK. So just keep those in mind. So right now I have everything set, and then background content. So essentially this this part is more important. So let's say you wanted to do like a PNG with a transparent background or an image that you wanted to put on top of something else, and let's say you didn't want a white box or a black box, you could always change it to transparent. But right now we're just going to keep it as white, so it kind of looks like a paper space. So once I have all my options selected the way I want, you can press create, and essentially it'll bring you to this blank kind of artboard space. So just to get started, we're going to bring in a existing sketch that I've done. You can either use, like Nadia said, you can use Illustrator line work, or you can bring in manual sketches that you've either scanned or taken photos of as your kind of base reference. Especially when you're collaging, it's nice to have kind of these guidelines that you can work from. So you're not just kind of randomly placing items on the page. So essentially, to import, you can show your files. So I'm just gonna drag one in from my file folder. Just hang tight. So here's, for example, an image I brought in. So right now it's just black and white line drawing. I have a basic tree, a pathway, this area over here, pool. It's very simplistic, which is great. You want like something clean and crisp, because when you bring in Photoshop, you can bring in, it'll turn it either to pixel images or raster images. So the vectors may get lost. So just keep in mind the resolution of your images as well. So right now, I'm just going to align this right in the center of my page. And then once I've done, you can also, if you, when you bring it in, you can play around with these options. So holding down shift, you can kind of skew it a bit, but we want to maintain it. So I'm just going to make this a little smaller just so I have a little more white space to work with. And then once I've got it to the size I like, then just simply select the check mark. So now you can see that I brought my image in and it shows up on this right hand side. So it'll show the file name. So right now I typed in, so I don't know if anyone recognizes it, but I essentially sketched the Barcelona Pavilion by Mies van der Rohe. So right here I have my sketch, and then we have the background that we pre-selected. So right now I have this layer locked. Oops. So simply, if you see, similar to Illustrator, we have our layers. So if I turn this off, this hides this layer. And then same with my background, I can hide it as well. So to get started, I usually like to lock my background layer, and then any kind of sketch that I'm working or drawing or adding onto, I also like to lock. So I'm just going to lock these two. And then I'm going to start a new layer and start adding in textures and different elements to kind of give this drawing more life. So to get started, you can simply download images from online. So typically you want higher resolution images as well. PNGs are typically better without transparent backgrounds, especially for things when you import people or trees. But I'll also show you ways to remove the backgrounds and edit things as well. Sometimes it's hard to find the perfect images to put in, but there's always ways to customize them. So to get started, we're going to kind of focus on this bottom left area, adding in the walkway or pathway. So I found this marble kind of texture online, and right now it imports as this big image. So I'm just going to bring it in, and it automatically creates a new layer. So the great thing about Photoshop is it'll do that automatically for you. So just keep in mind your file name size or your file name. Sometimes when you import images from online and you don't save it with like a appropriate label, it's just the automatic one, it may show a bunch of random numbers and letters. So it's always good to get in the habit of naming them so you kind of know when you're going through this list what each one is. So for example, I named this white stone texture, very basic. But once this list gets very like congested, it'll help me in the long run. So I brought in this image of this kind of marble stone background or texture. But I want to fit it to this area because it's obviously not the same. It doesn't align. It's just this blank kind of rectangle texture. So to do so, I brought it in. If you go to edit, and then transform, you can free transform is just basic scaling like I showed you previously. So I'm just going to scale this down to a relative size and simply align it, and then click select check. And then if I go back to edit, there's also more specific transforming options as well. So we have scale, rotate, skew, distort, and perspective. For these types of drawings, typically distort will help you do a lot of help you create the images you want. So I'm going to select distort. And if you look, when I move these, you can select each kind of point in the boundary box, and you can move it to adjust the kind of orientation that you want in your image. So for example, if I move this to kind of align with my line work, you're able to distort, and then that way the image kind of gets adjusted to the right perspective that you're working on. So again, sorry. So again, just adjusting until I get a result that I'm pretty much happy with. So that looks about right for now. So when I'm done, I'm going to press the check mark. And then again, you can turn it on and off. So right now I have this kind of pathway. So I'm going to show you another, again, example how to do this. So I'm going to bring in some more textures. So I have the marble texture of the actual building structure. So I found that online, and just simply JPEG, you can bring it in. I'm going to scale it down to kind of match the sizing of this. And then I'm going to skew it a little bit, make it larger. Just gonna zoom in, and then that's relatively the way I like it. And then I'm just going to copy and paste it, match this one. And then again, skewing it slightly. And then to create this third side of the wall, I'm going to copy and paste again. And then I'm going to go back to edit, and then transform, distort, and then align that with the wall. So again, the really nice thing about the distort feature is it kind of automatically takes the image and aligns it with the kind of perspective that you're working with. So already you can see it's aligning nicely, everything's nice and clean. And then I'm going to also add in, start to add in trees. So I'm going to bring in this image I found online and kind of make it relatively same size as the tree in the background, and then click the select when I'm, or the check mark when I'm done. And as you can see, this image I found isn't like a perfect PNG where it has a transparent background. So a quick way to get rid of this is just select the layer of the item that you want. And then if you go to this bottom right, FX, and then blending options, it'll bring you to this kind of layer style setting. So I'm just going to show, if you play around, so these kind of, if you play around with these markers, see how the background kind of disappears. You can quickly remove those kind of checks in the background. So essentially, if you move these ones, it'll remove any kind of white in the background, and then this side will remove any of the darkness. So you kind of, I like to zoom right in so you can kind of see, sometimes it leaves like an odd kind of like white boundary, so you want to get it as close as possible. Sometimes it's not perfect, but it does the job pretty well. So that looks about good for now. So as you can see, now my background is removed and the image is a nice clean PNG. So now I also want to remove half this tree because we want it behind. So what I can simply do, you can move the layers. So that's just a quick way to do it. But let's say you can also edit the image. So for example, you can select the tree and you can go to these lasso tools. So we have the lasso, polygon lasso, and then magnetic lasso. So the lasso tool is a selection tool where it creates these like circular selections. So if you, for example, select it, and then it'll create this kind of box. If I click delete, oh, sorry, I just have to make this. So again, some of these images have to be rasterized to be able to edit them. So a quick way to do that, if you just go to eraser tool, select it, it should pop up like a little option like it did. I'm just gonna go back, re-show that. So for example, if I go just the eraser tool, it'll bring you this option, just click OK. And now it's rasterized, so then I can like erase it and edit it. I have kind of like, so if you see my screen, I have kind of like a selection of images. This is for the tutorial, but typically you can have like file folders on your computer that kind of outline, for example, like all the trees that you've used in the past. You can have them here, and then also people is a great one to kind of collect, as well as different plants, textures that you find you're frequently using. You can kind of keep a database. So I can also show, let's say I didn't want to add the tree right away, but let's say I'm just like collecting images and want to edit them separately. You can simply save your file and then right click it and then open with Photoshop. And then, sorry, I'm just going to reshare. So now it kind of brings me only to like the tree and not the other image. You can still do the same editing. So blending options, and then removing that background. So see, this image is kind of tricky because when I saved it, it was a PNG, but it had this kind of checkered background. So you have to be careful what you download and double check. But it's an easy fix once you bring it into Photoshop. Yeah, and there's also, yeah, you can bring it into Illustrator as well. I think I saw that on the, but this is just a way So let's say I found this tree I liked online and I want to use it in the future. You can do those blending options and edit it. So then when you save it, for example, or export, export as, and I'll bring you to this, make sure it's PNG and the transparency is on. If it's not, then the background will show white. So you can click transparency. And then again, you can adjust these as well, and then as well as the canvas size. But that's just a quick way to edit them. And then that way, when I save it to my file, I'm just going to reshare. So see, now I saved it as pre-transparency background, or yeah, you can change it to whatever name you want, but that's just another way to bring it in. So then when I also, sorry, just going to go back to, so I'm going to delete this for now. And then I'm just going to simply drag and drop that tree I just edited. So see, now when I bring it in, the background's already removed. It's a lot easier to work with right from the get-go. So that's just another way to do it. And you'll find over time, the more drawings you do, the more kind of work you collected. And I'm also going to show as well, I have like a database in Illustrator with different images that I've kind of like selected, and you can also drag them in, but I'll show that after. So I'm just going to bring in this tree, and then you can play around. So same thing with Photoshop, the layers work similarly. Sorry, the same thing with Illustrator, the layers work kind of based on this hierarchy system. So the lower it is kind of the base, and then the higher they are on the list, the more they're like above the other objects in this kind of organization. So so I'll bring this below the blue marble, but you can also, for example, if you select this layer, let's say I wanted to crop it. So the polygon lasso tool, if you select that, you can kind of select the areas. For example, I'm just going to do a quick selection, and then once it's kind of a closed selection, it'll show this kind of like moving options. You can simply just delete, but it's not a raster. Once it's a rasterized image, you can delete that section. So see, now I have my tree, but I only have that part. So that's just another way you can kind of crop things. So now I'm stuck with this like selection tool. I want to get rid of it. So you can go to select and then deselect, and that will just kind of bring you back to this unselected image. So those are just some quick tools to get you started. And then I'm also going to, for example, let's say I wanted to add some of these window panes. So I wanted to add like kind of like a blue tone to them, kind of make them look similar to glass. I'm just going to go back to my images, bring in like a teal blue color. Just going to make this a bit smaller. Again, you can also do this. I would typically do this in advance on Illustrator. So I would fill everything with the colors that I kind of want and then bring it into Photoshop. But this is just a way to bring in color if you, a quick way. So I'm just going to distort. So for example, I'm just skewing it slightly. So normally for colors, you would probably want to do a fill, but in terms of textures, there's a lot of great graphics online that you can bring in. So this is pretty dark. I'm just going to turn down the opacity. So to kind of make it more a lighter blue or look more like glass, make sure your layer is selected. So teal blue window is my layer. I'm just going to turn this down and see how it kind of, you can still see the objects below. So right now it's not a perfect one, but that's just one way you can play with opacity as well. Let's say I wanted to show some more trees in the background. I'm just going to copy and paste. And I'm just going to bring these down. So for example, so see now they're more kind of shows are in the background, so it gives it more of like a collage look. That's just another way to play around with opacity or transparency. So again, just adjusting these is simple. Another thing you can also do, so let's say there's textures that you wanted to bring in, but let's say they're maybe a little bit too dark for your image, or they don't match the kind of same like light style you're going for. You can also, for example, select your the images that you brought in, go to image and then adjust, and then there's some basic Photoshop kind of photo editing options. So for example, you can play around with the brightness or darkness. So also contrast is a big one to play around with. So I think it really depends on the kind of like image you're trying to make. These kind of tools you'll adjust accordingly so that your images kind of fit in. So for example, let's say I had everything was kind of like grayscale or more kind of like muted tones, and I brought in this really vibrant tree. You can also adjust that. For example, images, adjust. I'm just going to turn down the brightness and then also play around with the saturation. Sorry, I don't think I selected that. Adjustments, saturation. So you can play around with that. So let's say I wanted a black tree instead, just to go with my kind of style, then you can change the color. Also, let's say you want to add a hue to it, adjustments, hue, saturation. Oops, sorry. You can play around with that. So there's just the different options in there that kind of help with your graphic kind of style and just making sure everything looks cohesive. So next, let's say I wanted to add people or objects into my kind of collage that I'm working with. Well, let's say, so to merge layers, you can hold down Shift and then select the, for example, 2 layers and then right click and then merge the layers, and then that way they're on the same one. Typically when I do them, I like to have everything kind of like separate. Sometimes it's nice so that you can like adjust each one accordingly. But you can also do it that way if you want to kind of group or categorize things. That's just a quick way. So let's say I want to bring in people now to kind of give more livelihood to my space. So again, you can bring in just drag and drop images. So automatically, like I had mentioned, whenever you bring in an image, it'll automatically generate a layer, which is really nice. You can also make your own layers too. So let's say I wanted to add like an overall kind of let's say I wanted to add, for example, like a filter to it. So actually I'll show this after because it's not a good example, but you can make your own layers and then you can also, they'll automatically generate them. So just keep in mind again, the organization of your layers is very important, and that the layers named, it'll match again the file name. So again, file naming conventions, making sure they're also they make sense to you and how they'll help you in the long run. But so let's say bring these people, I'm just going to scale them down so that they're a bit smaller because right now they're quite large. And then I'm also going to bring in this image. So again, we have one with a background on it that we want to remove. So relatively that's the size I want. Once we're happy with that, we go to FX again, blending options, and then just playing around with these. So I'm going to zoom right in. So again, sometimes it works perfectly, sometimes it doesn't. So just keep that in mind when you're using those. And then to make this look a lot more accurate, I'm going to bring in the statue. I don't know if you know the Barcelona Pavilion, but it has this famous statue in the pool section outside. So I'm going to bring that in, and now I have this kind of unique background. So again, if that FX doesn't work, you can actually go in and remove the background manually. So this is, sometimes it can be time consuming, the more crisp and clean you want that cutout to be, but here are some ways to do it. So again, what I like to do is going back with my one of my selection tools and just kind of going around roughly the perimeter of my object that I want to keep. Once I'm done, press enter. So right now I have like the statue selected, but I want the inverse. So if you go to select at the top and then go to inverse, it'll select the opposite of what you've selected. So sorry, that. And then you should be able to delete the outside. So we still have this kind of ring around it that we don't want, because we want to make it as clean as possible. So I'm just going to go in, sorry, deselect. There's the eraser tool. You can do background eraser, magic eraser, but the eraser tool works quite well. You can play around much like the brush tool. Sorry, much like the brush tool, for example, where you can draw. You can erase as well. So right now I have it on a 25 size setting. Essentially the hardness is kind of when, so for example, if I was to erase part of this, see how it's a very like crisp, when you cut away at it, it's like a crisp kind of line. If I turn this down, it almost like makes it a little more blurred. So I find turning down the hardness sometimes helps a lot, so you can really get in and clean up. So it's not as like harsh of a cut. So you can simply go in and erase this background. So let's say I spent the time to erase that. Again, adjusting my size of the circle. Sometimes this is like the most time consuming part. So again, doing this in a separate file and then saving it if it's like a reoccurring object that you're probably going to use again, like a tree, for example, or like plants or people. It's always good to do this in a separate file and then save it. Just so you have a backup of everything. You can also like copy and paste. So for example, if I had this all outlined, you can copy and paste it to another Photoshop file and then import it that way if you didn't by chance save it. So sorry, I'm just going to try and do this as quick as possible. So again, just out erasing. There's also the magic eraser tool and the magnetic lasso. So when you, for example, draw, it'll kind of cling to, how do I describe this? Like, it'll try and automatically find the outline of objects in an image. But I typically don't like to do this just because you have a lot more control if you do it yourself. That way, like the result is a lot cleaner. But there are option. There's that option to do it. Or the magic eraser, for example, it'll kind of go in and see how it's already like automatically finding the white that I don't want. You can do it that way, but then again, see there's parts of the hand and then the arm it automatically gets rid of. So you can kind of play around with those three options depending on the image to get it as clean as you want. But for now, let's just say I'm done, and that's a nice clean kind of crop of this statue. So I believe, let's say you wanted to do a shadow or a reflection of this. So essentially this below is like a pool. So there would be like a reflection in the water. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select my layer or the object and then edit. I'm going to copy, first, and then I'm going to edit. And then if you go down to transform, you can flip either vertically or horizontally. So for example, if I flip it, and bring it down, it kind of gives this like reflection, but obviously it doesn't look realistic. Sorry. This is why it's important to lock your layers as well when you're working. So to make it more realistic, what I can do is I can adjust the brightness and bring it down. So it's a nice dark kind of reflection, and then also the opacity as well. So you can play around with that, making shadows or reflections into like glass, for example, or water. That's just a quick way to do that. So, sorry, I'm just going to align these. So again, right now, this is just a very like quick kind of collage kind of style, but those are some tools to kind of get you started. I'm also going to show, for example, how, let's say I have an Illustrator drawing and I want to bring it into Photoshop, or I want to kind of work back and forth between the two softwares. So I'm just going to start a new one. I'm just going to call example 2. And then again, width and height is the same. Now, and then I'm just going to stop sharing and then reshare my screen to Illustrator. So I have this drawing that I've been working on. And essentially these are all vectors at the moment. So I had the line work. And then I using the drop paint tool, I added like the fill and the color to it. But I want to give this image more life and like richness, because it's really hard to kind of overlay different images in Illustrator. Sometimes it gives it not the same kind of texture to it. So I'm going to bring that into Illustrator. So a quick way to do this, you can actually select it and then copy. And then if I go back to my my Photoshop, if you paste, sorry, it may take a while because it's a heavy file. If I paste, it'll give you these options. So you can either do layers, smart object, pixels, path, shape. I'm just going to do pixels for now, and then I'll show you what it generates. So essentially what I did is I quickly copied and pasted my work from Illustrator into Photoshop. And right now it's a rasterized JPEG as well. So again, it's kind of like as if I were to export my final drawing in Illustrator. This is just a really quick way to do it. And again, I have all the color and the fills that I want. I'm just going to align it. So I'm going to start adding some people. So again, if I go back to my Illustrator file, I have this, if I wanted to do, for example, the previous drawing was more like a collage with like realistic textures in it. Whereas this one, I want to do maybe a more illustrative looking, more colorful, vibrant, kind of like line work style collage. Essentially, I found these images online, and again, which I had showed previously, the image trace. You can image trace using the different options. I believe the 16 color one is the most accurate, but it kind of quickly creates like these vector images that you can import and export into Photoshop as well. So that's just a way to do that. So for example, let's say I want to add some trees. I'm just going to select this tree, copy, go back to my Photoshop and paste it. Sorry, it's just loading. And then again, see it appears, and then you can change the size. So let's say I wanted some trees in my courtyard. And then I want to remove kind of, oh, sorry. Clean this up a little bit so it shows behind. You can use the eraser tool. So again, just a quick way to bring in this tree, and then I can also, for example, go back and kind of bring in some of these illustrations I exported quickly using the assets on Illustrator. So for example, let's say I had this chair, you can bring it in here. And then I'm just going to quickly add in some more, bring in some kids playing. So again, simply you can create like a whole scene by simply just importing and collaging in different images. So I'll show you the final result. So one example I did, this was my final result. So this was simply just bringing in illustrations and different images into that Photoshop. So again, very simple to kind of create a full scene. So I see a question. So do you just eyeball scale for Photoshop? So yes, so essentially Photoshop, like I mentioned, it's not as accurate in terms of like actual measurements and dimensions as Illustrator AutoCAD would be. So a lot of it is your own kind of eye, just making sure everything looks to scale proportionally, or also in space, like artistic touches to your drawing. So for example, I'm just going to open Photoshop again. So a great way to add kind of add to your Photoshop like renderings is adding, like, for example, like an overlay or like a weather layer. So for example, this scene is a winter scene, so I'm going to add snow to it. So essentially this is my image, my final image. I'm happy with it. Everything's arranged the way I want it. This isn't a PSD file, it's just the image as the background. But to simply add, for example, a snow layer, I'm going to just bring in from, again, you can search online, type in simply snow overlay or snow texture, and then you can drag it in. Just a quick way, for example, to make weather. So I found this one online, and then again, it automatically generates a layer. So I'm just going to drag it to the extents of the page and then click the check mark. So right now I can't see my image because it's a black background. I only see the snow and the black, but I can't see what's beneath. So to quickly get rid of this, you can go in, for example, and use that FX again. Because this would be a good example of one you could get rid of the black in it. So for example, just adjusting that, you can make it only the white show. But another option is if you go to these settings on the right in your layers, if you just click that arrow, it'll bring you more options. You can go to screen, and then that will also get rid of the black. So it kind of screens out the image. So it only sees like what you want essentially. So now I'm left with these white kind of snowflakes, and it gives it more like life to your image. Another way to kind of enhance this image, so I put in a street light just for this example, but let's say you had street lamps to kind of show light. So let's say it was a nighttime scene and you want to show the light shining from the lamp. Simply create a new layer. I'm going to call it light, for example. Make sure it's selected. I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool, simply draw a box, kind of in the way that you want the light to kind of shine down and the kind of extents of it. So once I have that selected, simply go to the gradient tool. So right now I have it on this kind of pre-selected yellow. So essentially, if you click on that box, it's this name of it is foreground to transparent. So essentially you have your color on the one end and then it goes to transparent, kind of like light, how it there's like a gradient effect. You can also play around with the different options there. They have some also pre-selected colors, or you can use a color, for example, on the left. If there was a specific, like let's say it was a red light, you could change it to that. But right now I have this yellow. And you simply draw down. So once you have the box selected, you draw down in the direction that you want your gradient to follow. So I drew from the top to the bottom, and then, so I have this, but it's kind of, it doesn't look realistic yet. So I'm just gonna zoom in. So right now it's still selected, but I'll select my light. And then if you go back to edit, and then if you go to transform and skew, what you can do is you can adjust these and see now how the light is still, it's only going, it's kind of, it has the, it's projecting more accurately. So that's just a quick way, and I'm going to deselect this. It's still a bit too harsh for a light for it to look really real. So if I select this layer, if you go down to filter and then blur, Gaussian blur is great for lighting. It kind of gives it that like fuzzy kind of effect. So you can play around with these options. So I'm just going to bring this all the way up. So let's say if you had like a spotlight and you just want it kind of more radiating, you would turn that all the way up and it kind of gives this fuzzy. But we want it still kind of showing the light kind of shining on this plant, for example. I'm just going to select it there. See how now there's that nice kind of blurred edge instead of that harsh line. That just eliminates that. And then you can also go back, for example, if you wanted to play around with these, sometimes that will help with the effect. So for example, I wouldn't use this, but that's, for example, what a linear burn would look like. And then also lighten, screening effect, overlay sometimes is great for lighting as well. But I'm just going to turn down the opacity. So see now it's a little bit less harsh. And then if I go back to my background, I'm going to zoom out. If I go to my image, adjust brightness, now you can see the background is adjusted, but you still have that same light. So for example, if it's a night scene, then the light would kind of stand out in that sense. So that's just a quick way to do light. Yeah. Is there any more questions? Let's say I wanted to show people kind of in the windows, but I don't want them to look colored. I want them to have like almost a silhouette. You can also, a quick way to do this is find, for example, like silhouette images online, download them PNGs, or you can go back and do your image trace as well. So if I go back, where's my Illustrator? So for example, I have these kind of silhouettes of people. I believe I image trace them. So let's say I like to do it this way. There are alternatives, but for me, I just like Illustrator is one of my strengths. So, and I also love the image trace tool. So I'm going to select this and just add, for example, a black fill, and then see how you have an effect, kind of like a silhouette effect. Copy, and then, sorry, I'm just going to reshare. So I just copied and pasted into my Photoshop drawing. I'm going to scale it down and kind of put these people in the background. So let's say relatively that's the size I want. You can turn down the opacity and see now you have that kind of in the background behind the glass kind of silhouette image as well. So again, just opacity. I think there was a question, actual hand drawing. So this was a scan drawing I did really quickly, sketch. But let's say I wanted to add more texture and I didn't have time to color it, or I wanted to do it more digital. Sometimes it's nice to hand draw it first to kind of see what you're like the image that you want to compose versus working directly online. So for example, you can sketch it out on paper or an iPad, any format you like, and then bring in the image here. And then again, I'll just quickly bring in, so for example, for this section, I'm just going to bring in a tree, scale it down. So the nice thing about this image is kind of everything is proportionally the way I want it already. It's simply just collaging and adding in to kind of match the existing framework of my sketch. So I brought in this tree. I'm going to get rid of the background. It's going to add it over here. Whoop. And then I'm going to bring in another one. So this tree is showing fine, but I think I want to keep it similar to my existing one. So I'm going to bring it on top. Oop. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to delete these. Clean it up a little bit. So typically for sections 2, you want that like thick, harsh line. So in this case, I want to turn my hardness up all the way so that when I cut it, it's nice and crisp. And again, this is just rough right now. And then I believe, I think in my Illustrator I had. So I'm just going to bring in an image of So again, see how I'm like starting to populate the section drawing with just images I'm finding online or my own drawings, and then it's just a really quick way to kind of convey the narrative or the image well. As so you don't have to do like a very, very detailed Illustrator drawing. You can simply have the base in like a hand drawing as well, and then bring it in. And then I'm just gonna add in trees, or sorry, add in some birds. And then if I delete my base layer, I mean, you would probably want to draw that section line. So I'm just going to quickly do that. So this is very rough, but I'm just going to outline it for the purpose of this. So if I were to remove that, essentially, once you populate it with all the elements you want to match your drawing, then you would be left with this digital image instead. So that's just a quick way to do that as well. So I think this is also like a very great way to like, yeah, I would highly recommend doing like line drawing in a separate software and then bringing it in. Because typically in Photoshop, it's hard to get those like crisp, clean lines that Illustrator would, or your own drawings would. So in that sense, this is the Photoshop. The way I would see it is collaging, adding textures, more like color, and different features to your images. Whereas like all your line work, making sure the perspective is on, or just the overall composition of the arrangement of the space. That's what I would do in Illustrator. But yeah, those are just some tools to get